Hello and welcome to this delightful, clean, historical Western romance by Shelfie audiobook. We're thrilled to have you join us. Before we dive in, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button, give this audiobook a thumbs up, and share it with your friends. Your support in these small ways helps us bring you more heartwarming romance stories at no cost. Now settle in, get comfortable, and let yourself be swept away into a world of adventure, love, and unforgettable characters. Enjoy! This audiobook is copyrighted by Shelfie Bennett. Chapter 1: The Desperate Decision. The clock on the mantel ticked with merciless precision, each second punctuating the awful stillness of the room. Martha Wilson clutched her handkerchief so tightly her knuckles had turned white, her eyes fixed on the motionless form that had, just yesterday, been her vibrant brother. Pneumonia moves quickly in constitutions weakened by stress, Dr. Harrington had explained not 30 minutes ago, his voice softening as he'd packed his useless instruments. Your brother was quite determined to make that western journey despite my warnings. Now alone, Martha allowed her tears free rein. Oh, Matthew, she whispered, reaching out to smooth a lock of hair from his forehead. His skin felt like cooled wax beneath her fingertips. The boarding house room, Matthew's home for the past 3 months, seemed determined to crush her with its smallness and the lingering scent of illness. A stack of letters tied with blue ribbon caught her attention on the modest desk by the window. Martha recognized the handwriting immediately. The same elegant script had appeared on envelopes that Matthew had proudly shown her over recent weeks. Miss Catherine Hargrove, Golden Creek Ranch, Wyoming Territory. Martha untied the ribbon with trembling fingers and began to read the topmost letter. Dearest Matthew, Father's condition worsens with each passing day. The physician from Cheyenne offers little hope beyond comfortable management of his symptoms. My heart breaks to think he might not see next spring's calving season. How I count the days until your arrival. The ranch hands whisper when they think I cannot hear, doubting a woman's ability to manage such an enterprise alone. Father insists that once you arrive and we are wed, their doubts will scatter like autumn leaves in a strong wind. I confess I've never been one for flowery sentiments. Ranch life affords little time for such luxuries, but the thought of your steady presence beside me brings comfort I hadn't thought possible from someone I've yet to meet in person. Your train ticket is enclosed, as promised. Please telegraph your expected arrival date when convenient. With anticipation, Catherine Martha's gaze shifted to the small side table where a train ticket lay, its destination printed in bold letters. Cheyenne, YME Territory. Departure. Tomorrow. How could you leave me like this? She murmured, then immediately regretted the selfish thought. Matthew hadn't chosen to die. He'd been planning a new life, a wife, a ranch, a future far from Boston's crowded streets and limited prospects for a bookkeeper with modest abilities. A future that had now vanished like morning mist. The apartment Martha had shared with her brother since their parents' deaths looked both familiar and strangely altered as she entered it 3 hours later. The landlord had already visited. An eviction notice was tacked to the door with ruthless efficiency. 2 weeks to vacate the premises. Martha had barely removed her bonnet when an aggressive knock rattled the doorframe. She opened it to find 2 men with expressions carved from granite. Ms. Wilson? The taller one inquired, his tone suggesting it was hardly a question. I'm Mr. Donovan. This is Mr. Pierce. We're representatives of Merchants National Bank. He paused, surveying the modest room with obvious disdain. We've come about your brother's outstanding loans. Matthew, her voice caught. My brother passed away this morning. Their expressions didn't soften. Our condolences, Pierce stated without a hint of sincerity. However, the debt remains. $234 is owed, plus accumulated interest. Martha felt the blood drain from her face. That's impossible, Matthew never mentioned. The documents bear his signature, Donovan interrupted, producing papers from his jacket pocket. As his next of kin, the obligation falls to you. I haven't got that kind of money, Martha whispered. Pierce's lips curved in what might generously be called a smile. Then perhaps you have items of value? Jewelry? Silver? Martha glanced around their modest quarters. What little had survived their gradual descent into genteel poverty after father's business failed had already been sold to finance Matthew's planned Western venture. "We'll return in 3 days," Donovan announced, returning the papers to his pocket. "Payment in full, or we'll be forced to pursue legal measures." The door closed behind them with terrible finality. Martha sank onto the worn settee, her mind spinning like a weather vane in a gale. She emptied her reticule onto the small table. $1.76 clinked mockingly against the wood surface. With mechanical movements, she began gathering Matthew's possessions. His Sunday suit, his favorite books, the small silver pocket watch that had been their father's. Each item twisted the knife of grief deeper. At the bottom of his trunk, she discovered a bundle of letters, Catherine's correspondence carefully preserved. Martha sat cross-legged on the floor and read each one, watching a relationship unfold through ink and paper. The final letter, dated just 1 week ago, contained a desperate plea. "Matthew, I've never been one to beg, but I'm near that point now. Father insists he's improving, but the doctor's face tells a different tale. The bank has called in a portion of our loans, citing poor management since Father's illness. Without your arrival and the funds you've promised to invest, I fear we'll lose everything my parents worked 20 years to build. Please hurry, my dear Matthew. I need you more than I can properly express in words." Martha stared at the letter long after she'd finished reading, an impossible idea taking shape in her mind. No one in Wyoming knew what Matthew looked like. The train ticket was paid for. Catherine Hargrove was expecting someone who didn't exist anymore. "This is madness," Martha whispered to the empty room. Yet the alternative, debtor's prison, or worse, pressed against her consciousness like a physical weight. The scissors felt impossibly heavy in Martha's hand as she stood before the mirror. Her reflection stared back, wide-eyed and frightened. A woman of 24 with chestnut hair that fell well past her waist, her one vanity. Her mother had brushed it 100 strokes each night, a ritual Martha had maintained even after pneumonia, that cruel thief returning now for Matthew. Had taken her mother 5 years prior. "Forgive me, Mama," she whispered, lifting the first section. Snip. A 3-foot length of hair fell to the floor like a broken promise. Martha bit her lip to keep from crying out. Snip, snip. More locks joined the first, forming a mournful pile around her feet. When she finally lowered the scissors, a stranger gazed back from the glass. A person with ragged, chin-length hair and red-rimmed eyes. The bandages came next, wound tightly around her chest until she could barely draw breath. Matthew's clothes hung loosely on her frame, but with his vest and jacket over top, the effect was passable. She'd always been tall for a woman, a characteristic that had diminished her marriage prospects, but now seemed providential. "My name is Matthew Wilson," she practiced, pitching her voice lower. "I'm from Boston, traveling to Wyoming Territory to—" A sharp knock interrupted her rehearsal. "Rent due!" Mrs. Flanagan's voice carried through the door with impressive volume for a woman of her diminutive size. Martha froze, panic flooding her system. Then, drawing a shallow breath against the restrictive bandages, she called out in her newly practiced voice. "1 moment, please." She opened the door just enough to pass the coins through, nearly all she had left. Mrs. Flanagan peered at her suspiciously. "Where's your sister today, Mr. Wilson?" Martha's heart thundered against its cotton constraints. "She's indisposed." "Well, tell her I'll need the rest by week's end, or you'll both need new lodgings." The landlady pocketed the coins and turned to leave, then paused. "You look different today. New haircut?" "Yes," Martha managed, her voice cracking slightly. "Needed a change." Mrs. Flanagan shrugged. "Suits you better than that fancy style you normally wear." The door closed before Martha could process that her disguise had worked on someone who'd known her for years. Grand Central Depot hummed with activity, a beehive of humanity rushing in all directions beneath its soaring ceiling. Martha clutched Matthew's carpetbag with white-knuckled intensity, certain that at any moment someone would point and cry out, "Imposter." No one did. She approached a newspaper vendor, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Chicago Tribune, please." "That'll be 3 cents, young man," he replied without a second glance, extending the paper. Young man. The word sent a peculiar thrill through Martha, equal parts terror and triumph. On the crowded westbound train, Martha claimed a window seat and immediately buried her face in the newspaper. Around her, businessmen discussed investments, a mother soothed a fussy infant, and a pair of students debated philosophy with the passionate certainty of youth. None spared her a second glance. As fields and towns blurred past the window, Martha silently recited the facts she'd memorized from Matthew's correspondence. Catherine is 22. Her mother died in childbirth with a brother who didn't survive. Her father raised her alone, teaching her ranching alongside the hands. She can ride better than most men and keeps the ranch books with meticulous care. She dislikes frivolity, but pressed wildflowers as a child. Her favorite is larkspur. The train whistle blew, a mournful sound echoing Martha's conflicted heart. Each mile carried her further from everything familiar and deeper into deception. "It's just temporary," she whispered to her reflection in the window glass as dusk painted the landscape in deepening shadows. "I'll tell Catherine the truth, explain about Matthew, ask for enough money to make a fresh start somewhere, and that will be the end of it." The reflection offered no reply, but in its eyes, Martha could read her own doubt. She opened Catherine's last letter again, studying the penmanship. Strong, decisive strokes with no unnecessary flourishes. What kind of woman would she be? Would she show mercy to a desperate stranger bearing terrible news? Or would she call for the sheriff the moment Martha revealed her true identity? As the train rocked gently on its westward journey, Martha vacillated between crushing guilt and fierce resolve. Matthew would be appalled by her scheme, her proper, honest brother who had always followed every rule. Yet hadn't his own dreams of Western reinvention been a kind of deception too? The bookkeeper transforming himself into a rancher, hoping Catherine wouldn't notice the softness of his hands or his ignorance of cattle. Night fell completely, transforming the window into a mirror. The stranger with short hair and borrowed clothes stared back at Martha, a question in eyes that hadn't changed despite everything else. "Who will you become when this journey ends?" Martha had no answer, only the rhythmic clacking of train wheels carrying her toward a future built on falsehood and perhaps, if she were very lucky, eventual redemption. Chapter 2: Arrival at Golden Creek. The Cheyenne Railway platform hit Martha with a sensory assault entirely unlike Boston's orderly stations. Dust swirled in golden eddies around stomping boots. Rough-voiced men shouted over one another while livestock bawled from nearby pens. The April air carried scents of leather, manure, and something unfamiliar. A wild, sage-tinged breeze that seemed to whisper of endless open spaces. "Move along there, boy." A porter nearly collided with Martha, pushing a cart piled with mail sacks. "Sorry," she mumbled, pressing herself against a post. Her heart hammered against its cotton bindings. "Stay calm. You're Matthew Wilson now. Act like you belong." Martha hoisted Matthew's trunk and immediately regretted it. The unwieldy box contained everything she now possessed in the world, making it simultaneously precious and impossibly heavy. She staggered forward 3 steps before her arms began trembling. "Whoa there, young fella. You'll do yourself an injury." The voice belonged to a leathery-faced man with spectacular white whiskers that seemed to explode from his cheeks like cotton batting. He wore a battered hat adorned with what appeared to be fishing lures. "I'm managing perfectly well, thank you," Martha replied in her practiced, deeper voice, even as the trunk slipped perilously in her grasp. "Course you are," the man said cheerfully, plucking the trunk from her hands with remarkable ease. "And I'm the Queen of England. Name's Hank Dixon, run the stage to Golden Creek, which I'm guessing is where you're headed, since there ain't much else past it except mountain and sky." Martha opened her mouth to protest, then closed it. "How did you know?" Eastern clothes, air of someone who's never seen a place without cobblestones, and that particular expression of terror mixed with determination. Hank winked. "Get one of you city folk every month or so, usually running from something or chasing something. Which are you doing, if you don't mind my asking?" "Neither," Martha said stiffly. "I'm meeting someone. Well, stage leaves in 30 minutes. That'll give you time to settle your stomach before we start bouncing. First trip out west can be mighty unsettling to Eastern constitutions." Martha quickly discovered Hank hadn't been joking about the bouncing. The stagecoach lurched across the rugged terrain like a ship in a gale, sending passengers colliding into one another with each rut and dip. Besides Martha and Hank, the coach contained 3 other travelers: a drummer with an impressive collection of patent medicine samples, a widow returning to her son's homestead, and a young man with the unmistakable look of a schoolteacher. "So what brings you to Golden Creek, Mr.?" The widow, Mrs. Abernathy, peered at Martha with friendly curiosity. "Wilson, Matthew Wilson," Martha replied, concentrating on keeping her voice steady despite the coach's violent pitching. "I'm meeting my—" the word stuck in her throat momentarily. "My fiancé." All 3 passengers immediately brightened. "Ah, would that be the Hargrove girl?" Mrs. Abernathy clapped her hands together. "Lovely news. That poor child has carried so much responsibility these past years. Catherine Hargrove is the finest horsewoman in 3 counties," the schoolteacher offered. "Taught my younger brother to ride when no one else could manage it." The medicine drummer leaned forward. Her father's ranch was the pride of the territory before his health failed. Shame what's happening to it now. Martha clutched the edge of her seat as the coach hit a particularly vicious bump. "What exactly is happening to it?" The 3 exchanged glances. "Well," the schoolteacher began carefully, "between Josiah's heart troubles and the silver strike pulling away workers, they've struggled to maintain the operation. Several neighboring outfits have had their eye on that land for years." "The bank's not helping matters," Mrs. Abernathy added with a sniff. "That new manager, Mr. Carlton, is not the understanding sort." Martha digested this information with growing unease. Matthew's letters had mentioned Catherine needed help with the ranch, but had significantly downplayed the severity of their situation. "You arriving is the best news that family's had in months," Hank called over his shoulder as he navigated a treacherous bend. "Miss Catherine's been counting down the days." A fresh wave of guilt washed over Martha. These people, this entire community, expected a savior in Matthew Wilson. Instead, they were getting a desperate woman with precisely $2 to her name and absolutely no knowledge of ranching. "I'll just tell Catherine the truth immediately," Martha resolved. "Surely she'll understand." Golden Creek appeared on the horizon like a mirage, a collection of wooden structures springing improbably from the vast landscape. As the stagecoach rolled down the town's single dusty street, Martha cataloged the establishments with mounting apprehension. General store, blacksmith, saloon, small church, and a handful of other businesses whose purposes she couldn't immediately discern. Everything looked raw and unfinished compared to Boston's established neighborhoods. Here, nature seemed perpetually on the verge of reclaiming the town, dust coating every surface, tumbleweeds caught against steps, the surrounding wilderness pressing close like an attentive audience. The stage creaked to a halt before a building marked Golden Creek Mercantile and Post. Martha's fellow passengers disembarked with expressions of relief, stretching cramped limbs and brushing dust from their clothing. That's when Martha spotted her. A young woman stood slightly apart from the small welcoming crowd, holding a hand-lettered sign. Matthew Wilson. She wore men's riding trousers beneath a practical split skirt, a chambray shirt with rolled sleeves, and a wide-brimmed hat pushed back to reveal honey-brown hair caught in a simple braid. Her face, though partially shadowed, showed a dusting of freckles across sun-bronzed skin. Martha had imagined Catherine Hargrove as a delicate flower in need of masculine protection, the sort of wilting lily who populated Matthew's favorite novels. This woman looked capable of felling timber and wrestling steers before breakfast. "You getting down, or you planning to live in my coach?" Hank's amused voice shattered Martha's paralysis. No. Martha forced herself to move, nearly tripping on the coach step. Catherine Hargrove stepped forward, her sign lowering as her gaze swept over Martha. Something unreadable flickered across her features. "Matthew?" she asked, her voice surprisingly melodic despite its clear Western inflection. Martha managed a jerky nod, suddenly unable to produce words. Catherine's face bloomed into a smile so brilliant it transformed her entirely. "Thank God you've come at last." Before Martha could prepare herself, Catherine had closed the distance between them and enfolded her in a brief but enthusiastic embrace. Martha froze, acutely aware of both the bandages constricting her chest and the pleasant scent of Catherine's hair, something herbal mingled with sunshine. "You're exactly on time," Catherine continued, stepping back to examine Martha with undisguised curiosity, "though I expected someone larger from your letters." "Disappointed?" The question escaped before Martha could stop it. Catherine laughed, a rich, genuine sound. "Not at all. Pa always says it's brains that matter, not brawn. We've plenty of muscle on the ranch, but precious little sense." She gestured toward a wagon parked nearby. "I've brought the buckboard. Hank, would you mind loading Mr. Wilson's trunk?" "Already on it, Miss Catherine," Hank replied, heaving Martha's belongings into the wagon with practiced ease. He tipped his hat toward Martha. "Good luck to you, young man. Suspect you might need it." The wagon jolted along a rutted trail leading away from town. Catherine handled the reins with casual expertise, seemingly unbothered by the rough terrain that sent Martha bouncing on the hard wooden seat. "You're awfully quiet," Catherine observed after several minutes of silence. "Your letters were so eloquent, I imagined you'd be quite the conversationalist." Martha swallowed hard. The journey was taxing. Of course, how thoughtless of me. 3 days on that train, then Hank's bone-rattling coach. Catherine clucked sympathetically. "We'll have you settled with a hot meal soon enough, Mrs. Perkins. Our housekeeper has been cooking since dawn. She's convinced Eastern gentlemen require 7 courses for dinner." Martha attempted a smile. "That's unnecessary. I have simple tastes." "Thank goodness. One less thing to worry about." Catherine's expression sobered. "I expect you're wondering why I've been so persistent in my letters about your arrival date." Here it was the moment for truth. Martha opened her mouth to confess everything. "The situation at Golden Creek has deteriorated faster than I anticipated," Catherine continued before Martha could speak. "Pa had another episode last month. The doctor says his heart is failing." "I'm so sorry," Martha murmured, her confession evaporating. Catherine nodded, her knuckles whitening on the reins. 3 of our most experienced hands left for the silver mines 2 weeks ago. Can't blame them. We were already behind on wages. The remaining men work hard, but they're stretched too thin. Meanwhile, the bank has called in a portion of our loans 6 months early. Can they do that? Apparently, there was language in the agreement allowing for reassessment of terms if the management situation became unstable. Catherine's mouth twisted. "Mr. Carlton has decided a dying man and his unmarried daughter constitute instability." Martha watched the landscape roll past, verdant grasslands bordered by distant purple mountains. Despite its troubles, the land possessed a wild beauty unlike anything she'd seen in Massachusetts. "How much time do you have? With the bank, I mean." 3 months to meet the first payment. If we make that, they'll honor the original schedule for the remainder." Catherine glanced sideways at Martha. "Pa was counting on your arrival. He believes once we're married, the bank will consider the management stable again." Martha nearly choked. "Married?" "Not immediately, of course," Catherine flushed. "I know we've only corresponded. We should have a proper courtship first, however brief, but eventually—" She trailed off, clearly embarrassed. "I'm being terribly forward. Pa would be mortified." The guilt in Martha's chest congealed into a heavy mass. These people were counting on Matthew, on his presence, his financial contribution, his maleness, to save their home and livelihood. Her plan to confess, borrow money, and depart suddenly seemed not merely impractical, but cruel. "I didn't bring as much capital as I'd hoped," Martha ventured carefully, the complete truth being that she'd brought none whatsoever. Catherine's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Your expertise is what we truly need. Anyone can throw money at problems, though I admit we need that too, but Pa says you have a keen mind for business. He believes with your financial knowledge and my practical experience, we can turn things around." The wagon crested a small rise, revealing a picturesque valley cradled between sloping hills. A cluster of buildings surrounded by split-rail fences marked the center of what must be Golden Creek Ranch. Even to Martha's untrained eye, signs of neglect were visible. Sagging fence sections, a barn that needed painting, untended fields. It's not much compared to what you're used to in Boston, Catherine said softly, misinterpreting Martha's silence. But it's home. Martha thought of the cramped apartment she'd shared with Matthew, of the boarding house room where he'd died, of the train compartment that had been her home for 3 days. It's beautiful, she said honestly. Catherine's answering smile made something flutter in Martha's chest, a sensation both alarming and not entirely unpleasant. The main house of Golden Creek Ranch stood 2 stories tall, its weathered clapboard siding speaking to years of harsh elements. A wide porch wrapped around the front, furnished with simple rocking chairs that faced the breathtaking mountain view. Catherine led Martha inside where the aroma of roasting meat and fresh bread enveloped them. A plump woman with iron-gray hair twisted into a severe bun emerged from what Martha presumed was the kitchen. "Mrs. Perkins, this is Matthew Wilson," Catherine announced. "Matthew, our housekeeper and unofficial guardian angel." The older woman scrutinized Martha with narrowed eyes. "Skinny as a fence post," she pronounced. "We'll need to put some meat on those bones if you're to be any use around here." "Mrs. Perkins," Catherine protested. "It's fine," Martha assured her, relieved someone found her lacking as a man rather than suspecting she wasn't one at all. "I was never one for physical pursuits in Boston." Well, fresh air and honest work will sort that out." Mrs. Perkins's expression softened marginally. "Supper's nearly ready, but the master's been asking for you both since he heard the wagon. Best not keep him waiting." Catherine's face tightened with worry. Is he having a bad day? No worse than usual. The excitements kept him alert. The housekeeper lowered her voice. "It'll do him good to see the young man he's pinned so many hopes on." Martha's stomach clenched. She followed Catherine up a wide staircase to the second floor, each step carrying her deeper into her deception. Catherine paused outside a closed door, turning to Martha with unexpected vulnerability in her expression. "He's not as strong as he once was. Please, don't let your reaction show, no matter how surprised you might be." Before Martha could respond, Catherine knocked gently and opened the door. The bedroom was spacious and airy, with large windows overlooking the ranch. Josiah Hargrove occupied a carved oak bed that dominated the room. Martha's first impression was of a man significantly diminished, as though the bed were slowly consuming him. His face retained hints of former handsomeness, with Catherine's same determined jawline, but illness had carved deep hollows beneath his cheekbones and bleached all color from his complexion. "Pa, he's here," Catherine announced with forced cheerfulness. "Matthew Wilson has arrived safely." Josiah's sunken eyes brightened. He struggled to sit straighter against his pillows, extending a hand that trembled visibly. "Young man, come closer where these old eyes can see you properly." Martha approached the bed, gingerly taking his offered hand. His skin felt paper-thin, the bones beneath prominent. "Sir, it's an honor to meet you," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. Josiah studied her face with unexpected intensity. "You're not what I pictured from your letters." Martha's heart nearly stopped. "You're younger," he continued, "and Catherine didn't mention how your eyes match the color of our summer sky." He chuckled, a sound that dissolved into a concerning wheeze. "Good thing I'm already confined to this bed, or I might worry about my daughter running off with a handsome devil like you before the preacher can make it official." "Pa," Catherine protested, color flooding her cheeks. Martha felt her own face heating. "I assure you, sir, my intentions are honorable." "Of course they are. I'm a fine judge of character. Have to be in ranching. And your letter showed a man of principle." Josiah's grip tightened slightly on Martha's hand. "God has answered our prayers by sending you to us, son. With Catherine's knowledge of ranching and your business acumen, Golden Creek will survive." The naked hope in his eyes pierced Martha's conscience like a blade. "I'll do everything in my power to help," she promised, the words feeling simultaneously true and utterly false. "That's all I ask." Josiah released her hand, sinking back against his pillows. "Now you two run along. I can see the poor boy's dead on his feet from traveling. Get him settled before Mrs. Perkins's roast becomes boot leather." Catherine led Martha back downstairs and through the house to a small but pleasant bedroom off the kitchen. "This was originally for a houseboy, but we haven't had one in years. I thought you might prefer being down here rather than upstairs near Pa's sick room. The hours can be irregular. The room contained a narrow bed, a washstand with a porcelain basin, a small dresser, and a window overlooking what appeared to be a kitchen garden. It was modest, but immaculately clean. "This is perfect," Martha said, genuinely grateful for the privacy it would afford. "I'll have one of the hands bring in your trunk." Catherine hovered in the doorway. "Supper in 30 minutes. The washroom is through that door if you'd like to freshen up." After Catherine departed, Martha sank onto the bed, her mind spinning. The lie had grown from a desperate impulse into something monstrous. These people, good, hardworking people facing genuine hardship, believed she was their salvation. "I should leave tonight," she thought frantically. Write a note explaining everything and slip away before causing more harm. She was still contemplating escape routes when a soft knock interrupted her thoughts. The door opened before she could respond, revealing Catherine holding a stack of blankets. "The nights get cold this time of year," she explained, crossing to place the blankets at the foot of the bed. "We Wyoming folks sometimes forget that Eastern blood runs thinner." "Thank you," Martha murmured, acutely aware of Catherine's proximity. "I wanted to say—" Catherine hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "I know this must be overwhelming. You've traveled thousands of miles to a strange place to marry a woman you know only through letters, and now you find us in dire circumstances." "It's not what I expected," Martha admitted truthfully. "If you wish to return to Boston, I would understand. The bank will take the ranch regardless. At least you wouldn't be trapped in a failing venture." The offer, a perfect opportunity to escape, hung between them. Martha looked into Catherine's eyes and saw something that stopped her cold. Pride warring with desperation, and beneath both, a flicker of hope she couldn't bear to extinguish. "I'm not going anywhere," Martha heard herself say. Relief washed over Catherine's features. She reached out impulsively, her hand brushing Martha's as she adjusted the blankets. The brief contact sent an unexpected jolt through Martha's arm, warming her cheeks. "I'm glad," Catherine said softly. "Truly." After she left, Martha remained motionless, staring at her tingling fingertips with a mixture of confusion and alarm. This strange, foreign sensation was decidedly not part of her plan. Neither was the tiny voice in her heart whispering that perhaps, just perhaps, she didn't want to leave after all. Chapter 3. Learning the Ropes. A rooster's imperious crow jolted Martha from deep slumber, her eyes flying open to an unfamiliar ceiling. Sunlight streamed through thin curtains, painting golden patterns across a floor that definitely wasn't her Boston apartment. For one heart-stopping moment, panic seized her. Where was she? Then reality crashed back. Wyoming. Golden Creek Ranch. Matthew's clothes folded neatly on the chair. Her hand flew to her chest, encountering the loosened bandages she'd slightly relaxed for sleeping. The previous day's events tumbled through her mind like clothes in a washing barrel. The stagecoach, Catherine's unexpected appearance, Josiah Hargrove's desperate hope. "Lord help me," she whispered to the brightening room. A second crow, somehow even more self-important than the first, propelled Martha into action. She couldn't risk Catherine or Mrs. Perkins bursting in to wake their guest. With clumsy fingers, she rewrapped the binding across her chest, cinching it tighter than comfortable, but necessary for her disguise. Matthew's shirt hung loosely enough to conceal any remaining feminine curves. Martha splashed water on her face from the wash basin, the shock of cold clearing the last cobwebs of sleep. The small mirror above revealed a stranger's hair, mussed in a way that could belong to either a disreputable woman or an untidy man, which seemed oddly fitting. A brisk knock rattled her door. "Breakfast in 10 minutes, Mr. Wilson," Mrs. Perkins called. "Miss Catherine's already at the table." "Thank you, I'll be right there," Martha replied, pitching her voice lower. She tugged Matthew's waistcoat over her shirt, grateful that men's fashion allowed for layers that further disguised her figure. A final glance in the mirror, shoulders back, chin raised, stride lengthened, and Martha stepped into her second day of imposture. The dining room smelled gloriously of coffee, bacon, and freshly baked bread. Catherine sat at one end of a rectangular oak table, a ledger open beside her plate as she made notes between bites of eggs. She glanced up as Martha entered, her smile warming the room more effectively than the morning sun. You slept well, I hope. Catherine closed the ledger. Eastern travelers often struggle with the quiet out here, too used to city noises. Like roosters? Martha quipped before she could stop herself. Catherine laughed. Methuselah is rather proud of his vocal abilities. Pa claims that rooster's been waking the ranch since before I was born, though that's mathematically impossible. Mrs. Perkins appeared with a loaded plate that she set before Martha with minimal ceremony. Eat, she instructed. You'll need your strength. The breakfast was hearty fare, eggs, bacon, fried potatoes, and biscuits still steaming from the oven. Martha realized she was ravenous despite her nerves. She tucked in with enthusiasm that wasn't remotely feigned. Good to see a healthy appetite, Catherine observed, though Frank will probably work it all off you before noon. Martha paused mid-bite. Frank, our foreman. Catherine's expression remained neutral, though something in her tone suggested complexity. He's been with the ranch since before my mother died, knows every inch of Golden Creek. As if summoned by his name, the dining room door swung open with unnecessary force. A barrel-chested man with iron gray hair and a mustache that would put a walrus to shame filled the doorway. His weathered face bore the permanent tan of someone who considered indoors a necessary evil. Mornin', Miss Catherine. His gaze landed on Martha with the warmth of a January blizzard. So this is the Eastern gentleman. Catherine performed introductions. Frank Thomas, this is Matthew Wilson from Boston. Matthew, Frank oversees all ranch operations. Martha extended her hand. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Thomas. Frank's handshake felt deliberately crushing. We'll see about that once you're finished with your... His eyes flicked dismissively over Martha's half-eaten breakfast. Morning tea party. I'll be waiting by the barn. Time to see what our city boy can do. After he departed, Catherine sighed. I apologize for Frank. He's protective of the ranch, and me. He doesn't like the idea of an outsider coming in, Martha guessed, her appetite suddenly diminished. He doesn't like change of any kind, Catherine corrected, which is ironic since ranching is nothing but constant adaptation. But Frank knows his business and we need him, especially now. Martha forced herself to finish eating, anxiety building with each bite. She'd never been astride a horse in her life. The closest she'd come to livestock was admiring carriage horses on Boston Common. Whatever Frank Thomas had planned, humiliation seemed the most optimistic outcome. Don't let him intimidate you, Catherine said as Martha rose from the table. Her smile held a mischievous glint. Frank barks considerably more than he bites. That's reassuring, Martha replied, not feeling reassured in the slightest. Frank Thomas's idea of seeing what the city boy could do apparently involved comprehensive demonstration of everything Martha couldn't do. The morning began with a mare named Buttercup, who, despite her gentle name, regarded Martha with the suspicious side-eye of a creature who recognized an imposter when she saw one. Nothing to worry about, Frank announced to the 3 cowhands who'd gathered to watch the entertainment. Buttercup, you're so gentle, my 5-year-old niece rides her. Martha approached the animal cautiously. Nice horse, she murmured, patting its neck with what she hoped appeared to be confident familiarity rather than terrified hesitation. You planning to sweet-talk her all day or actually get on? Frank demanded. With assistance that was more manhandling than help, Martha found herself hoisted into the saddle. For one miraculous moment, she maintained balance, allowing herself a small surge of hope. Then Buttercup, evidently feeling she'd been patient long enough, took 3 steps forward. Martha went backward. The ground met her with enthusiastic firmness, driving the air from her lungs. Through watering eyes, she saw Frank and his men exchange glances that translated clearly as, "This is what Boston sent us?" "Perhaps we should try something else," Frank suggested with exaggerated patience. "Perhaps we should," Martha agreed, struggling to her feet with as much dignity as one could muster with straw in one's hair. The something else turned out to be collecting eggs, a task Frank described as something even children manage daily. The hens in the coop had clearly not received this message about their cooperative role in ranch life. When Martha reached beneath one particularly territorial bird, she received a pecking that would have impressed a military drill sergeant. Her undignified retreat from the co-op, pursued by an outraged ball of feathers, provided the morning's entertainment for every ranch hand within viewing distance. By the time Frank assigned her to water Mrs. Perkins's vegetable garden, Martha's confidence had withered like lettuce in August. Surely this simple task couldn't go wrong. The irrigation system, a series of channels designed to deliver water from a nearby stream, seemed straightforward enough. Martha removed the small dam of rocks blocking the main channel, pleased when water began flowing exactly as expected. Her satisfaction lasted approximately 45 seconds before she realized the water wasn't stopping where it should. The channel had silted up further down, causing the stream to overflow its course and create an impromptu pond where Mrs. Perkins's prized carrots grew. Sweet, merciful heavens, the housekeeper's horrified cry alerted Martha to the disaster. My vegetables! Martha scrambled to rebuild the dam, slipping in the mud and thoroughly soaking her clothes in the process. By the time she managed to stop the flow, she resembled nothing so much as a half-drowned scarecrow. Frank Thomas surveyed the sodden garden, the mud-covered man before him, and the gathering crowd of amused ranch hands. Miss Catherine said you had other talents, he remarked dryly. For everyone's sake, I sincerely hope that's true. Catherine found Martha behind the barn, attempting to salvage her dignity by scraping mud from her trousers with a stick. The morning's misadventures had left her looking like she'd personally wrestled the entire ranch into submission and lost spectacularly. I heard about the incidents, Catherine said, her voice suspiciously controlled. Martha looked up miserably. Have you come to suggest I return to Boston? Actually, I came to give you these. Catherine held out a bundle of clean clothes. Mrs. Perkins thought you might need them. That's very kind, considering I just drowned her garden. A snort escaped Catherine, an undignified sound she immediately tried to suppress. It's not funny, Martha insisted. It's a little funny, Catherine countered, her composure cracking, especially the part where Henrietta, that's the hen, chased you across the yard. She's surprisingly fast for a creature with such small legs. Catherine's restraint dissolved completely. She leaned against the barn wall, shoulders shaking with laughter. I'm sorry, she gasped between breaths. Your face right now, you look so offended. Martha wanted to maintain her dignity, but Catherine's laughter proved contagious. Before she knew it, they were both helpless with mirth. Martha's muddy appearance and the morning's disasters suddenly transformed from mortifications into absurdities. Frank thinks I'm completely useless, Martha admitted when they'd finally regained composure. Frank expected that. Catherine wiped tears of amusement from her eyes. He's been preparing his city folk are worthless speech for weeks. Well, I've certainly helped him prove his point. Catherine's expression softened. Not everyone is meant for physical ranch work. You mentioned bookkeeping experience in your letters. Perhaps that's where your talents would be better applied. Hope kindled in Martha's chest. Ledgers and numbers she understood. I'd be happy to examine the accounts if you think it would help. I think it might help enormously. Catherine glanced back toward the house. Pa's resting now. Why don't you clean up and I'll show you his study when you're ready. Josiah Hargrove's study reflected the man himself, once imposing, but now showing signs of neglect. Leather-bound books lined oak shelves, their spines dulled by a fine layer of dust. A massive desk dominated the room, its surface cluttered with papers in haphazard piles. Pa hasn't been able to manage the accounts since his first attack last fall, Catherine explained, gesturing toward the chaos. I've tried, but between the ranch work and caring for him, you've had too much on your shoulders, Martha finished for her. Catherine's grateful smile struck an unexpected chord. Exactly. I understand cattle and horses, but these numbers, she shook her head. They're another language entirely. Martha approached the desk with the reverence of a scholar discovering ancient texts. Financial records spoke to her in ways living creatures apparently did not. She sorted through the mess, uncovering ledgers, invoices, bank notices, and correspondence stretching back months. May I organize these my way? She asked. Please do anything you can, Catherine replied, settling into a chair by the window. Martha lost herself in the work, spreading papers across the floor in chronological order, creating separate stacks for expenses, income, loan documents, and correspondence. She barely noticed time passing as patterns emerged from chaos. As sunset painted the study in amber light, Martha straightened from her final calculation, back aching from hours hunched over ledgers. This doesn't make sense, she announced. Catherine looked up from the mending she'd brought in hours ago. What doesn't? According to Frank's reports, you've lost 37 cattle to predators in the past 4 months. That's what he told Pa. Mountain lions have been particularly bold this season. Martha shook her head. Mountain lions may be bold, but they're not that efficient. Most ranches lose maybe a dozen head yearly to predators. Over 30 in a single season would require a small army of unusually ambitious cats. Catherine set aside her sewing. What are you suggesting? I'm not sure yet. Martha shuffled through another set of papers. There are other discrepancies. Frank reported purchasing new equipment that never appears in your inventory, and the feed costs seem inflated compared to market prices. Could it be honest mistakes? A mistake here or there, certainly. This many errors, all coincidentally making your financial situation appear worse? Martha's expression was skeptical. It's possible, but unlikely. Catherine joined her at the desk, bending close to examine the ledgers Martha had organized. Her nearness sent an unexpected flutter through Martha's chest that had nothing to do with her bindings. You've created order from complete disarray, Catherine marveled, skimming the neat columns and clear summaries Martha had drafted. The situation isn't as dire as it appeared, Martha explained, focusing firmly on the papers. You're struggling, yes, but not on the brink of collapse. If we correct these discrepancies and implement better management practices, Golden Creek could recover within a year. Catherine's eyes widened. Truly? The bank loan is your biggest immediate concern, but if we can demonstrate that the ranch's actual financial position is stronger than reported, we might negotiate better terms. Matthew, this is... Catherine searched for words. I don't know how to thank you. You offered me shelter when I arrived unexpectedly, Martha replied, the irony of her own words not lost on her. I'm simply returning the favor in the only way I can. Evening drew its indigo curtain across the Wyoming sky, stars appearing with a brilliance unknown in Boston's smoky atmosphere. Martha and Catherine sat on the front porch, steaming cups of tea warming their hands against the spring night's chill. I should speak with Pa about our findings, Catherine mused, gazing toward the distant mountains, now reduced to purple silhouettes. Though I hate disturbing him with business matters during his recovery. Perhaps wait until we have a concrete plan, Martha suggested. Concerns without solutions only create unnecessary worry. Catherine nodded thoughtfully. You're right. It's just... Her voice faltered. He entrusted me with the ranch's care, and I feel I've let him down by not noticing these issues sooner. You've been managing an entire ranching operation while nursing your father, Martha said firmly. The fact that Golden Creek still functions at all is testament to your capability, not evidence of failure. That's generous of you to say. It's the truth. Martha hesitated, then added, Sometimes we're too close to a situation to see it clearly. That's why a fresh perspective helps. Catherine studied her tea as if seeking wisdom in its depths. I've always prided myself on self-reliance. Since Mother died, it's been Pa and me against the world. Accepting help feels like weakness, Martha suggested when Catherine trailed off. Exactly. I understand completely. And Martha did understand, perhaps too well. Her entire life had been a lesson in solitary endurance, first watching her father struggle after his business failed, then caring for her mother during her final illness, and finally trying to keep both herself and Matthew afloat in a world indifferent to their troubles. Without thinking, Martha placed her hand over Catherine's, where it rested on the porch swing between them. Accepting help isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the strongest thing we can do. The moment the words left her mouth, Martha realized their hypocrisy. Here she sat, perpetuating an elaborate deception rather than honestly asking for assistance. Catherine didn't pull away from the touch. Instead, she turned her palm upward, their fingers loosely intertwining in a position that could be interpreted as either friendly or something more. I'm glad Pa arranged for you to come, she said softly. When we began corresponding, I thought his notion of finding me a husband from back east was ridiculous. But now, Martha's stomach nodded. Now I understand what he saw that I couldn't. Someone who complements me perfectly. Catherine's gaze lifted to meet Martha's, her expression open and trusting. We should begin planning the wedding soon, nothing elaborate, just a simple ceremony once we've started implementing your financial strategies. The sooner we're officially partnered, the sooner the bank will recognize the stability of Golden Creek's management. The word wedding struck Martha like a physical blow. In her focus on the immediate challenges, she'd somehow pushed aside the inevitable conclusion of her charade. Catherine wasn't just seeking a business partner, but a husband. Martha jerked back involuntarily, upending her teacup. Hot liquid splashed across her trousers and the porch boards. "I'm so sorry," she jumping to her feet. "How clumsy of me." "No harm done," Catherine assured her, rising to help. She reached for her handkerchief and bent to blot the spill, bringing her face unexpectedly close to Martha's as they both stooped to clean the mess. For a heartbeat, they froze in that position, faces inches apart. Martha could see individual freckles across Catherine's nose, the amber flecks in her brown eyes, the slight part of her lips in surprise at their sudden proximity. Something electric hummed in the scant space between them, a recognition neither could name nor deny. Martha straightened abruptly, nearly bumping her head on the porch railing. "I should retire," she announced, her voice unnaturally high. She coughed and continued in her practiced deeper tone. "Early start tomorrow if I'm to continue with the accounts." Confusion flickered across Catherine's features. "Of course. Sleep well, Matthew." Martha fled to her room, heart hammering against its bindings. She paced the small space like a caged creature, thoughts whirling in frantic circles. What was happening to her? This strange, persistent awareness of Catherine wasn't part of her plan. The flutter when their hands touched, the breathless moment on the porch, these reactions couldn't possibly be what they seemed. Yet Martha couldn't deny the truth that had been growing since their first meeting. She was developing feelings for Catherine Hargrove. Feelings that complicated an already impossible situation. Even if Martha confessed everything now, her true identity, her brother's death, her desperate impersonation, what then? At best, Catherine would feel betrayed and manipulated. At worst, Martha could face legal consequences for her deception. And if she somehow continued this charade, the ending could only be disaster. Catherine deserved a real husband, not a frightened woman in borrowed clothes. Martha sank onto her bed, head in hands. She'd come to Wyoming seeking temporary sanctuary and perhaps modest financial assistance. Instead, she'd found a puzzle box of ethical quandaries with no visible solution, and at its center, emotions she neither expected nor knew how to manage. "What have I done?" she whispered to the empty room. The Wyoming night, vast and indifferent, offered no answer. Chapter 4: Growing Closeness. 2 weeks at Golden Creek Ranch had transformed Martha in ways both visible and hidden. Her hands, once smooth from Boston parlors, now boasted modest calluses from limited but determined ranch work. Her skin had acquired a light golden hue from hours spent outdoors, and her posture had subtly shifted to accommodate Matthew's confident stride. Inside, the transformation ran deeper. Martha woke each morning with purpose, no longer consumed by panic or indecision. She'd established a rhythm that played to her strengths while minimizing discovery. Mornings were devoted to the ranch accounts, afternoons to whatever basic tasks Catherine deemed appropriate for her bookish fiancé, and evenings to discussions about the ranch's future that increasingly felt like conversations between partners rather than strangers. On this particular afternoon, Martha struggled with hay bales in the smaller barn, having volunteered for the task after noticing Catherine's exhaustion at breakfast. She'd managed to stack 6 bales, an accomplishment that would have been laughable to the ranch hands, but represented a personal triumph for her unaccustomed muscles. Pausing to catch her breath, Martha noticed movement through the study window across the yard. Frank Thomas stood at Josiah's desk, rifling through papers with uncharacteristic haste. Something about his furtive manner raised her suspicions immediately. As she watched, he removed several documents, replaced them with others from his pocket, then rearranged everything to appear undisturbed. Martha ducked behind the barn door when Frank emerged from the house, his expression unreadable as he strode toward the corral, where the hands were breaking a new Mustang. She waited until he was well away before slipping back to her work, mind racing with possibilities, none of them benevolent. Later, as they inspected a section of fencing that needed repair, Martha casually mentioned the incident. "I saw Frank in Mr. Hargrove's study earlier." Frank's brow furrowed. Checking that the fence line matches the property records, I imagine. We've had trouble with the Henderson spread pushing boundaries. And seem to be replacing some papers, Martha pressed. The foreman's expression hardened. Listen here, Wilson. I've managed Golden Creek's business for 15 years. Sometimes that means updating documents Catherine's father might misinterpret in his weakened state. The last thing Josiah needs is more worry. Of course, Martha replied, keeping her tone neutral. I only mentioned it because you're still a city boy who doesn't understand how things work out here. Frank adjusted his hat with finality. Best stick to your ledgers and leave ranch business to those who know it. Martha recognized dismissal when she heard it. She nodded politely and changed the subject, but the incident lodged in her mind like a splinter, small but persistently troubling. Sunday morning arrived with the solemnity that seemed reserved exclusively for the Sabbath. Even Methuselah the rooster crowed with greater dignity, as though aware of the day's importance. Martha dressed with particular care in Matthew's Sunday suit, which Mrs. Perkins had altered subtly after declaring it hanging off him like a scarecrow's outfit. The woman's sewing skills had thankfully improved the fit without revealing what lay beneath. The Golden Creek Community Church stood proudly at the end of the town's main street, a white clapboard building with a modest steeple that nonetheless managed to convey spiritual authority. Martha followed Catherine inside with growing trepidation. Houses of worship had always struck her as places where deception was more readily exposed, as though proximity to sacred matters rendered lies more visible. The interior smelled of pine, polish, and Sunday-best clothing. Townspeople filled the pews, their curious gazes following Martha and Catherine as they made their way toward the front, where Josiah already sat. The rancher's health had improved enough for outings, though the effort clearly taxed him. Everyone's staring, Martha whispered to Catherine. Of course they are, Catherine whispered back, her lips quirking with amusement. You're the most interesting thing to happen in Golden Creek since Mrs. Turner's prize pig escaped and disrupted the mayor's speech last July. The service began before Martha could inquire about this intriguing incident. Reverend Howard, a slender man with enthusiastic eyebrows that seemed to conduct his sermons independently of his words, stepped to the pulpit and opened his Bible with practiced solemnity. Today's lesson comes from Proverbs, chapter 12, verse 22, he announced, his voice surprisingly resonant for his frame. Lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who act faithfully are his delight. Martha felt as though she'd been physically struck. Of all the biblical passages in existence, how had the Reverend selected the one most directly condemning her? She shifted uncomfortably, certain her guilt must be visible to the entire congregation. Deception corrodes the soul from within, Reverend Howard continued, his bushy eyebrows rising and falling for emphasis. The liar suffers more than the deceived, trapped in a prison of their own creation, walls built of falsehoods too numerous to remember. Each word hammered Martha's conscience. Her palms grew damp, and she resisted the urge to tug at her collar, which suddenly felt constrictive. The Reverend's gaze seemed to find her repeatedly, as though he could somehow sense the impostor in his midst. Beside her, Catherine noticed her discomfort. She reached over discreetly, giving Martha's hand a gentle squeeze of reassurance. The gesture, meant to comfort, only intensified Martha's guilt. Catherine's trust was the very thing she'd manipulated from the beginning. The remainder of the service passed in a blur of hymns and prayers. Martha moved her lips mechanically, her thoughts a tempest of shame and rationalization. She'd helped the ranch, hadn't she? The ledgers were now orderly, discrepancies identified, and a recovery plan taking shape. Surely those good deeds counted for something? As the congregation filed out afterward, Reverend Howard clasped her hand warmly. A pleasure to finally meet Catherine's intended. We've all been praying for Josiah to see his daughter settled before... He didn't complete the sentence, but his meaning was clear. Thank you, Reverend, Martha managed. Your sermon was most illuminating. Outside on the church steps, Catherine was immediately drawn into conversation with several townswomen, leaving Martha momentarily alone until a silk-clad figure approached with determined grace. Mr. Wilson, I simply had to introduce myself. The woman extended a gloved hand. Eleanor Phillips, my husband, manages the Territorial Bank branch. Martha recognized the name immediately from the ranch's loan documents. A pleasure, Mrs. Phillips. Such wonderful timing, your arrival in Golden Creek. Eleanor's smile held the practiced perfection of someone accustomed to social diplomacy. Catherine has shouldered so much responsibility. It will be lovely to see her properly supported by a husband. We haven't set a date yet, Martha replied cautiously, but surely before Founder's Day? Eleanor's eyebrows arched with delicate surprise. The dance is only 3 weeks away. What better occasion to introduce you officially as a married couple? Everyone expects it. Martha's stomach plummeted. Everyone? But of course. It's the talk of the town. Josiah has been so vocal about his satisfaction with the match. Eleanor leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Between us, my husband says timing is rather essential, given the ranch's situation. A stable management structure would significantly impact his lending decisions. Before Martha could formulate a response that wouldn't reveal her mounting panic, Catherine rejoined them, slipping her arm through Martha's with casual familiarity. I see you've met Mrs. Phillips, she observed. Sharing the latest town gossip, Eleanor? Simply welcoming your fiancé and mentioning the Founder's Day celebration, Eleanor replied smoothly. Such a charming tradition, our little community honoring its pioneering roots. This year will be especially memorable with your wedding beforehand. Martha felt Catherine stiffen slightly beside her, though her expression remained pleasant. We haven't finalized any plans yet. Of course. Eleanor's smile didn't waver. But do consider the practicalities. My husband was just telling me yesterday how impressed he was with the recent financial documentation you submitted, Mr. Wilson. A formalized partnership would only strengthen the ranch's position. After exchanging a few more pleasantries, Eleanor drifted toward another group, leaving Martha and Catherine in awkward silence. I apologize for Eleanor, Catherine finally said as they walked toward their wagon. She means well, but subtlety isn't her strong suit. Is it true? Martha asked. Does everyone expect us to marry before Founder's Day? Catherine helped her father into the wagon before answering. Pa may have been more forthcoming about his expectations than I realized, but please don't feel pressured. We should discuss this privately. The ride home passed in uncomfortable silence, each occupant lost in private thoughts. Martha stared at the passing landscape, her mind replaying Eleanor's words with growing alarm. A wedding wasn't just an abstract future event, it was an imminent expectation, complete with date and community anticipation. The masquerade was accelerating beyond her control, racing toward a culmination she couldn't possibly fulfill. Dark clouds gathered throughout the afternoon, matching Martha's mood as she sat in the study reviewing cattle sale records. The discrepancies in Frank's reporting continued to trouble her, particularly regarding missing livestock and inflated expenses, but she couldn't yet prove deliberate manipulation. The first raindrops struck the window like tentative visitors, quickly followed by a more insistent downpour. Thunder rumbled in the distance, drawing gradually closer as the storm approached in earnest. Martha was about to light a lamp against the premature darkness when Catherine burst into the study, her expression urgent. Lightning struck near the south pasture, she announced, already pulling on oilskin rain gear. The horses in the main barn are frantic. I need your help. Me? Martha asked incredulously. Wouldn't Frank or one of the hands? Frank took 3 men to secure the herd. The others are reinforcing the creek bank before it floods, Catherine explained, tossing Martha a rain slicker. It's just us. Panic fluttered in Martha's chest. Her previous encounters with the ranch horses had been unsuccessful at best, disastrous at worst. Catherine, A tremendous crack of thunder interrupted her protest. Catherine grabbed her arm. No time to argue. Those horses could hurt themselves if they panic badly enough. Rain assaulted them the moment they stepped outside, driven horizontally by fierce wind that threatened to snatch away their slickers. They ran toward the barn, boots splashing through rapidly forming puddles. The sound of frightened horses, high-pitched whinnies, and the percussive thud of hooves against stall doors grew louder as they approached. Inside the barn, the scene bordered on chaos. A dozen horses moved restlessly in their stalls, rolling eyes showing white in the lantern light. 2 had reared repeatedly, threatening to injure themselves against the wooden partitions. Talk to them, Catherine instructed. moving immediately toward the most agitated animal. They need calm voices, gentle movements. Martha stood frozen momentarily, then forced herself forward. She approached a chestnut mare who tossed her head anxiously with each lightning flash. "Easy there," she murmured, surprised when her naturally higher voice seemed to catch the horse's attention. "Nothing to fear from a little noise." The mare's ears flicked toward Martha, nostrils flaring as she assessed this human who spoke so differently from the ranch hands. Martha continued talking, nonsense mostly, but in a soothing tone that gradually seemed to affect the nervous animal. Across the barn, Catherine had managed to halter the most distressed horse and was leading it in a small circle, her movements confident despite the animal's size and agitation. Rain drummed against the roof, punctuated by thunder that seemed to shake the very timbers. Yet Catherine remained unruffled. Martha found herself struck by the woman's quiet competence. No wonder Golden Creek had survived Josiah's illness. Catherine possessed capabilities that had nothing to do with account books or bank loans. Martha had surprised herself by successfully calming 3 animals, including the chestnut mare who now nuzzled her hand seeking treats. "You have a way with them," Catherine observed, appearing beside Martha. "They respond to your gentleness." "I think they're just grateful I'm not trying to ride them," Martha joked, though pleasure at the rare praise warmed her despite her sodden clothing. They moved among the stalls, checking for any injuries or damage. In the strengthening glow of lantern light, their breath visible in the storm-cooled air, the barn felt strangely intimate, a shelter within a shelter. "I worry I won't be able to hold everything together," Catherine said suddenly, her voice barely audible above the diminishing rain. "The ranch, Pa's health, the loans, sometimes it feels like trying to carry water in cupped hands." The vulnerability in her admission caught Martha off guard. Catherine always projected such certainty that this glimpse beneath her armor felt like a rare privilege. "You've managed remarkably," Martha replied. "Most people would have collapsed under half your burden. Not without cost." Catherine stroked a horse's neck absently. "I haven't allowed myself to feel afraid because there's never been time for fear. But lately," she glanced at Martha, then away quickly, "since you arrived, I've remembered what it's like to share concerns instead of simply enduring them." Martha's chest tightened with emotion she couldn't quite name. "I'm glad I can help, even if I'm not the rancher your father hoped for." "You're exactly what we needed," Catherine said with unexpected intensity. "Your different perspective, your skills with numbers rather than livestock, these things complement what we already had. Pa sees it too, but Frank expects everyone to be a copy of himself." Catherine smiled wryly. "He measures worth by a man's ability to break horses and manage cattle. There are other forms of strength." Lightning flickered distantly, illuminating Catherine's face in brief electric moments. Her determined jaw, the light dusting of freckles across her nose, eyes that held both weariness and resolve. Martha found herself wanting to reach out, to offer comfort through touch rather than just words. She resisted, knowing such gestures carried different meanings now that she wore Matthew's clothes. "The ranch will survive," she said instead. "We've already identified ways to improve the financial situation, and your father is showing improvement every day." "And us?" Catherine asked softly. Eleanor Phillips wasn't entirely wrong about the expectations. The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither was prepared to fully address. "Let's secure the horses," Martha suggested, retreating to safer territory. "The rain's easing." They returned to the house drenched, despite their rain gear, water squelching in their boots and dripping from their hair. The sudden transition from storm to the warm kitchen set them both laughing, partly from relief, partly from the absurdity of their bedraggled appearance. "Mrs. Perkins will have our hides for tracking mud across her clean floors," Catherine said, her eyes bright with residual adrenaline. "Then we'd better remove these boots before she discovers us," Martha suggested, dropping to one knee beside the door. "Allow me." The gesture, intended as practical assistance, shifted into something else entirely as Martha knelt before Catherine. She carefully lifted one foot, supporting Catherine's ankle while working the mud-caked boot free. The simple action carried an unexpected intimacy. "You have unusual manners for a businessman," Catherine observed, her voice softly teasing as she steadied herself with a hand on Martha's shoulder. My mother believed in comprehensive etiquette training, Martha replied, focusing intently on the second boot to avoid meeting Catherine's eyes. She insisted even brothers should know how to assist sisters properly. The boot slid free, revealing a neat, stockinged foot. Martha remained kneeling momentarily, suddenly aware of their tableau. Herself at Catherine's feet, looking up at the rancher's daughter, haloed by lamplight, droplets of rain still glistening in her loosened hair. In that moment, the disguise felt gossamer thin. Martha wasn't playing a role, she was simply herself, harboring feelings that had nothing to do with deception and everything to do with the remarkable woman before her. Catherine seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere. Her eyes widened slightly, her lips parting on an indrawn breath. She extended her hand, helping Martha to her feet, but neither immediately stepped away, leaving them standing close enough that Martha could detect the clean scent of rain on Catherine's skin. "You have the smoothest hands I've ever seen on a man," Catherine murmured, glancing down at their still-joined fingers. "And such delicate features. If you weren't so tall, one might almost mistake you for—" Alarm jolted through Martha. She withdrew her hand hastily, nearly stumbling in her stockinged feet. "My father believed manual labor was for employees, not family members," she fabricated wildly. "I spent most of my childhood indoors with books and ledgers rather than outdoors with tools." "I didn't mean to embarrass you," Catherine said, clearly surprised by the strong reaction. "Not at all," Martha assured her too quickly. "I'm just very conscious of not fitting the Western ideal of manhood." "The Western ideal is overrated," Catherine replied with a small smile. "Half our cowboys can't write their own names or add beyond 20 without removing their boots. I'll take your smooth hands in bookkeeping any day." The genuine affection in her voice only deepened Martha's distress. She manufactured a yawn. "I should change into dry clothes before catching a chill. Good night, Catherine." "Good night, Matthew." Martha retreated to her room, heart hammering against its bindings. She peeled off her wet clothes and unwrapped the damp bandages with shaking fingers, relief flooding her as her compressed flesh was finally free. The simple physical comfort couldn't ease her mental anguish, however. Pacing in her nightshirt, Martha confronted the truth she'd been avoiding for days. She was falling in love with Catherine Hargrove. The realization was simultaneously exhilarating and devastating. Martha had never experienced such feelings, this constant awareness of another person, this desire to ease their burdens, this ridiculous happiness at merely being in their presence. If circumstances were different, Martha was living a lie that grew more elaborate and painful with each passing day. Catherine believed herself engaged to Matthew Wilson, a man who no longer existed. Their growing closeness was built upon a foundation of falsehood that would eventually, inevitably, crumble. Martha pressed her palms against her eyes, fighting unexpected tears. How had she allowed this situation to become so complicated? She'd intended a brief deception, a temporary measure until she could secure modest help. Instead, she'd entangled herself in a community's expectations, a family's hopes, and now, most disastrously, her own heart's yearnings. "What am I going to do?" she whispered to the empty room. The question had no answer, only the inexorable ticking of the clock marking time toward a future that couldn't possibly accommodate both truth and happiness. Chapter 5: The Truth Unravels. Founders Day dawned with the kind of pristine blue sky that seemed manufactured specifically for celebrations. Golden Creek's Main Street had transformed overnight. Bunting stretched between buildings, makeshift stalls lined the thoroughfare, and a wooden platform stood ready for speeches at the town square. The scents of sawdust, sugar, and excitement mingled in the air. Martha adjusted Matthew's best waistcoat, studying her reflection in the small mirror. Over the past weeks, she'd grown accustomed to her disguise, the short hair, the bound chest, the altered posture. Sometimes she caught herself forgetting, just for a moment, that Matthew Wilson was a creation rather than her true self. "Are you nearly ready?" Catherine called through the door. "Pa's already in the wagon." "Just a moment," Martha replied, giving herself a final once-over. Today represented a milestone of sorts. She would appear before the entire community as Catherine's fiancé. No longer a curious newcomer, but an accepted fixture in Golden Creek's social landscape. The thought both thrilled and terrified her, much like the woman waiting outside her door. Catherine's smile when Martha emerged caused a now familiar flutter in her chest. The rancher's daughter had abandoned her practical attire for a cornflower blue dress that highlighted her eyes and the honey tones in her hair, which fell in loose curls beneath a modest bonnet. "You look—" Martha hesitated, uncertain which compliments were appropriate from Matthew rather than herself. "Uncomfortable," Catherine supplied with a laugh, adjusting her skirts. "Mrs. Perkins insisted I couldn't represent Golden Creek Ranch in trousers, no matter how practical they might be for judging the horseshoe competition." Martha offered her arm with newfound confidence. "Well, I think you look beautiful." A becoming blush colored Catherine's cheeks. "Such flattery, Mr. Wilson. Boston manners indeed." Josiah waited in the wagon, his appearance markedly improved from when Martha had first arrived. Regular meals and reduced stress had restored some vitality to his frame, though he remained a shadow of the robust rancher visible in the portrait hanging in the study. "Quite the handsome couple," he remarked as they approached. "Makes an old man proud to see his daughter so well matched." Martha swallowed a pang of guilt and helped Catherine into the wagon. Each compliment, each expression of approval from Josiah, felt like another stone added to the wall of deception she'd constructed. Yet dismantling it now seemed impossible without causing pain to people she'd grown to care for deeply. Golden Creek buzzed with activity, children racing between stalls, women comparing handicrafts, men clustered around livestock displays and shooting competitions. The sense of community wrapped around the gathering like a patchwork quilt, each person contributing their unique square to the whole. Martha found herself oddly comfortable among the festivities. She'd memorized enough names and relationships to navigate conversations, and her genuine interest in the ranch had given her common ground with many locals. When Catherine was pulled away to judge the preserve's competition, Martha successfully maintained several exchanges without arousing suspicion. "Wilson!" Frank Thomas approached, his perpetual scowl softened by the holiday atmosphere. "Didn't expect to see you participating in the axe throw." Martha glanced at the competition area where burly men tested their strength and accuracy. "I believe I'll leave that to the experts. My talents lie elsewhere." "So I've noticed," Frank replied, his tone neutral but expression calculating. "Catherine seems mighty pleased with your bookkeeping." "The ranch records simply needed organization," Martha replied modestly. "Anyone with basic training could have accomplished the same." Frank studied her with narrowed eyes. "Maybe, though it's curious how some figures don't match what I reported to Josiah." Martha met his gaze steadily. "Numbers rarely lie, Mr. Thomas, unlike people." Something dangerous flickered across Frank's features before a nearby cheer distracted him. Someone had hit the bullseye in the shooting contest. When he turned back, his customary gruff manner had returned. "Enjoy the festivities, Wilson, but remember, not everything in the West is as straightforward as your Eastern ledgers." He tipped his hat and departed, leaving Martha with the distinct impression she'd just received a warning. Her unease dissipated when the pie auction began. Catherine had mentioned offhandedly that she'd entered her mother's apple pie recipe, though she'd immediately dismissed her own baking skills as adequate at best. When the auctioneer held up Catherine's creation, a golden-crusted pie with an expertly latticed top, Martha found herself raising her hand without hesitation. $2 from Mr. Wilson," the auctioneer called. $3, countered Henry Parker, the blacksmith's son, who'd made his interest in Catherine evident despite her engaged status. Martha straightened her shoulders. $5. A ripple of appreciative murmurs passed through the crowd. $5 for a pie was extravagant, a working man's weekly wage. $5 from the Eastern gentleman. The auctioneer beamed. "Do I hear 6? Henry Parker scowled but shook his head. "Going once, going twice, sold to Mr. Wilson for $5. Catherine watched from beside the judge's table, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and pleasure. When Martha approached with her prize, an older woman nearby remarked loudly enough to be overheard, "Now there's a man who knows how to court properly." "You didn't need to do that," Catherine murmured as the auction continued. "It's just a pie." "It's your pie," Martha replied simply. "That makes it worth every penny." The genuine warmth in Catherine's eyes made Martha momentarily forget they were standing in a crowded square, surrounded by townspeople. For that brief instant, they existed in a private world where her deception was irrelevant, and only their connection mattered. The illusion shattered when Eleanor Phillips materialized beside them, resplendent in a burgundy dress that must have been ordered from Denver. "How romantic," she exclaimed. "Though I suppose we should expect nothing less from an engaged couple." She linked her arm through Catherine's. "Speaking of which, my dear, you simply must tell me your plans for the ceremony. The entire town is positively buzzing with anticipation." Martha's stomach twisted as Catherine was drawn away into a circle of women, all eager to discuss wedding preparations she knew could never come to fruition. The reminder of her impossible situation cast a shadow over her previous enjoyment. Evening transformed the town square into an enchanted space. Lanterns hung from wires stretched between buildings, casting golden pools of light across the makeshift dance floor. A small band of local musicians played lively tunes while couples circled the floor with varying degrees of grace. "I should warn you," Martha said as Catherine led her toward the dancing. "I'm not particularly accomplished at this." Catherine squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Fortunately, I've been leading reluctant dance partners since I was 12. Just follow my movements." "Shouldn't I be leading you?" Martha whispered, conscious of appearances. "Technically, yes, but perhaps we can compromise." Catherine positioned them correctly, then whispered, "I'll guide subtly while pretending you're leading. No one will notice if we're convincing enough." The arrangement proved more challenging than anticipated. Martha concentrated so intently on her footwork that she repeatedly stepped on Catherine's toes, triggering apologies that made them both dissolve into laughter. "You dance exactly like you ride," Catherine teased after a particularly awkward turn. "With more enthusiasm than skill." "At least I haven't fallen off the dance floor yet," Martha countered, earning another burst of laughter from her partner. Their shared amusement drew indulgent smiles from onlookers. Josiah, watching from his seat near the band, nodded approval at the obvious affection between them. Martha caught his eye and felt a fresh stab of guilt, quickly suppressed as Catherine executed a perfect spin that required her full attention to follow. As they completed their second dance, Martha's gaze drifted past Catherine's shoulder toward the entrance to the dance hall, and her heart stopped. Standing in the doorway, surveying the crowd with predatory focus, were Mr. Donovan and Mr. Pierce, Matthew's creditors from Boston. Martha froze mid-step, her hand tightening convulsively around Catherine's. "Matthew, what's wrong?" Catherine's face creased with concern. The music continued around them as Martha stood immobilized, watching her past and present collide with devastating inevitability. How had they found her? Why had they tracked Matthew's debt across thousands of miles? Her voice failed. "Excuse me, I need some air." She released Catherine and pushed through the crowd, desperate to reach the side door before being spotted. Behind her, she heard Catherine call her name, Matthew's name, but couldn't risk stopping. The cool night air hit her face as she burst outside, her mind racing. Perhaps she could hide until they departed. Golden Creek was a small stop on their collection route. Surely they wouldn't linger long without finding their quarry. Martha ducked behind a stack of barrels, her breath coming in short gasps. She needed to warn Catherine, needed to explain before, well, a cold voice interrupted her panicked thoughts. "Miss Martha Wilson, what an elaborate disguise." She whirled to find Donovan and Pierce blocking her retreat, their expressions a mixture of triumph and disdain. "Gentlemen," she managed, abandoning her masculine tone. "What a surprise to find you in Wyoming territory." "Not as surprising as finding you masquerading as a man," Pierce replied, "though I suppose desperate times call for desperate measures." Martha glanced around, confirming they were momentarily alone in the alley beside the dance hall. "How did you find me?" "Your landlady mentioned your brother's plans for Wyoming," Donovan explained, his voice dangerously reasonable. "When we inquired at the Cheyenne station, the stagecoach driver recalled a young man named Wilson, bound for Golden Creek. Simple deduction from there." "What do you want?" Martha asked, though she already knew. "The $234 your brother owed our bank," Pierce stated flatly, "plus interest and our travel expenses, which I'm afraid have accumulated considerably." Martha's heart sank. "I don't have that kind of money." "No?" Donovan's gaze swept her attire. "Yet you seem comfortably situated here, playing fiancé to the Hargrove heiress, we understand." Quite the lucrative charade. It's not like that, Martha protested. Fraud rarely is what it appears. Pierce stepped closer. Perhaps we should discuss your situation with the local authorities, or better yet, with your fiancée and her father. Terror shot through Martha. Please, I just need more time. The ranch is recovering financially. Once you've completed your deception by actually marrying the poor girl, Donovan interrupted. I think not. Your debt comes due immediately, Miss Wilson. Martha heard the dance hall door open, voices spilling into the night. She needed to end this conversation before being discovered. Tomorrow, she promised desperately. Come to Golden Creek Ranch tomorrow morning. I'll have your money. The men exchanged glances. All of it? Pierce asked skeptically. Yes, Martha lied, having no idea how she'd produce such a sum. Very well. Donovan's smile didn't reach his eyes. But if you're not there with payment in full, our next conversation will be with the sheriff and Miss Hargrove. They retreated toward the street, leaving Martha trembling with adrenaline and dread. She leaned against the building, trying to compose herself before returning inside. A quiet voice froze her in place. Matthew? Catherine stood at the alley entrance, confusion evident even in the dim light. I was worried when you rushed out, she continued, moving closer. Are you unwell? Just needed fresh air? Martha replied, struggling to deepen her voice again after speaking naturally to the creditors. Who were those men? Catherine asked, glancing toward the retreating figures. No one of consequence, Martha assured her. Just some travelers asking directions. Catherine's expression suggested she didn't quite believe this explanation, but she didn't press further. If you're feeling better, shall we return to the dancing? Pause talking about heading home soon. Martha nodded, offering her arm with a confidence she didn't feel. They had barely reached the dance floor when a commotion at the entrance drew everyone's attention. Donovan and Pierce had returned, this time with the town sheriff. That's her, Sheriff, Donovan announced, pointing directly at Martha. That's Martha Wilson, masquerading as her deceased brother and defrauding these good people. The music screeched to a halt. Every eye in the room swiveled toward Martha and Catherine, standing frozen in the center of the floor. What nonsense is this? The sheriff demanded, looking skeptical. Ask her yourself, Pierce challenged. She's a woman wearing men's clothing, pretending to be Matthew Wilson to escape debts in Boston. Catherine's hand slipped from Martha's arm. What are they talking about, Matthew? The genuine confusion in her voice shattered what remained of Martha's composure. I can explain, she began, but Donovan was already pushing through the crowd toward them. There's nothing to explain, he declared, reaching for Martha's collar. The evidence is right here beneath this gentleman's shirt. Before she could step away, his fingers closed around her collar and yanked. The sound of tearing fabric echoed in the sudden silence as buttons popped free, revealing the edge of the binding beneath. Gasps rippled through the assembled townspeople. Catherine's face drained of color, her eyes fixed on the visible binding. Matthew? She whispered, the question now carrying entirely different meaning. The sheriff stepped forward, frowning. Someone better start explaining, and quick. Martha stood amid the wreckage of her deception, dignity in tatters like her shirt. There was no escape, no clever explanation that could preserve the fiction she'd maintained these past weeks. My name is Martha Wilson, she admitted, no longer disguising her natural voice. Matthew was my twin brother. He died of pneumonia the day before he was meant to travel here. The collective shock was palpable. Catherine took a step backward, her expression transforming from confusion to dawning horror. Everything else was a lie? She asked, voice barely audible. Martha shook her head desperately. Not everything. The accounting work, the discrepancies I found. My feelings. Catherine's laugh held no humor. You don't have feelings, Miss Wilson. You have calculated deceptions. It wasn't like that, Martha insisted. I was desperate. Matthew died. I was about to be evicted. His creditors were threatening me. I only intended to come here, explain what happened, and ask for a small loan to start fresh somewhere. Yet you maintained this charade for weeks, the sheriff observed. That goes beyond desperation into deliberate fraud. Josiah had pushed through the crowd, his face ashen. You claimed to be the man who'd agreed to marry my daughter. You let me believe Catherine's future was secure. I tried to help, Martha said, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. The ranch accounts, the discrepancies in Frank's reports. More lies to justify your position, Frank's voice cut through the murmuring crowd. Slander against a loyal employee to strengthen your deception? Martha wanted to argue, to explain her suspicions about Frank's manipulation of the records, but the hostility surrounding her made clear that no one would believe her now. Catherine had remained silent, tears tracking silently down her cheeks. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, despite the evidence of her pain. Sheriff Miller, I won't be pressing charges against Miss Wilson. A ripple of surprise passed through the onlookers. Catherine, Josiah began to protest, but she raised her hand. Prosecution would only extend this humiliation for our family. Her gaze fixed on Martha, cold and distant. Instead, I want her gone from Golden Creek by morning. She's to take nothing that wasn't hers when she arrived. Martha felt as though she'd been struck. Catherine, please. Don't. The single word cut deeper than any elaborated rejection could have. You've played your role convincingly, Miss Wilson. The performance is over. The sheriff nodded. I'll escort her to gather her belongings and ensure she leaves town tonight. What about our money? Donovan demanded. From what I gather, she has none, the sheriff replied. Unless Miss Hargrove wishes to cover these debts? Catherine's expression hardened further. Her financial problems are not my concern. Then I suggest you gentlemen pursue legal remedies back in Boston, the sheriff told the creditors. We've had enough disruption to our Founders' Day celebration. Pierce and Donovan exchanged dissatisfied glances, but didn't argue. The crowd parted as Sheriff Miller took Martha's arm, guiding her toward the exit. As they passed Catherine, Martha tried one last time. I never meant to hurt you, she whispered. What grew between us was real, at least for me. Catherine didn't acknowledge the words, her gaze fixed straight ahead, shoulders rigid with wounded pride. The journey back to Golden Creek Ranch passed in numb silence. Martha sat beside the sheriff in his wagon, unaware of the night's chill or the bumps in the road. She'd lost everything. Not just her deception and temporary security, but something far more precious that she'd never expected to find. Mrs. Perkins watched with open disapproval as Martha gathered her few belongings under the sheriff's supervision. The bundle seemed pathetically small. Matthew's clothes, the papers she'd brought from Boston, and the small silver pocket watch that had been their father's. The stage doesn't leave until morning, the sheriff informed her as they returned to his wagon. You can spend the night in the anteroom at my office. Thank you, Martha replied mechanically. As they prepared to depart, a figure emerged from the house. Catherine stood on the porch, her celebration dress incongruously bright against her somber expression. Wait, she called, descending the steps. Martha's heart leapt with irrational hope, quickly extinguished when Catherine approached the wagon and tossed a small leather pouch inside. Your payment for the accounting work, she explained flatly. We may have been deceived, but Hargroves pay their debts. The pouch landed heavily in Martha's lap. Perhaps $30 or $40, she estimated, not enough to satisfy the creditors, but sufficient to deliver her away from Golden Creek. The work was my gift, Martha said softly. I don't want payment. And I don't want your gifts, Catherine replied, her voice tight with controlled emotion. Take the money and never return to Golden Creek. Before Martha could respond, Catherine turned and walked back to the house without a backward glance. The door closed with quiet finality, severing the connection between them more effectively than a slammed portal ever could. The sheriff cleared his throat uncomfortably. Time to go. As the wagon pulled away, Martha stared at the darkened windows of the ranch house. The home that had briefly felt like her own. Someone had extinguished the lamps in the study, where she'd worked so diligently to untangle the ranch's finances. Now those efforts would likely be dismissed as part of her deception, including her suspicions about Frank's mismanagement. The thought of Catherine and Josiah, vulnerable to whatever scheme Frank might be orchestrating, twisted in Martha's chest like a physical pain. Yet what could she do? Her credibility was destroyed, her presence rejected. Any warning would be interpreted as another desperate lie. The miles accumulated between Martha and Golden Creek Ranch, each hoofbeat and wheel rotation widening the distance. By morning, she would board the eastbound stage carrying nothing but regrets and memories of a happiness she'd briefly touched before destroying with her own deception. You got somewhere to go back east? The sheriff asked, breaking the lengthy silence. Martha gazed at the star-scattered Wyoming sky, so vast and indifferent to human suffering. "No," she answered truthfully, "not anymore." Chapter 6: Starting Over. The Mississippi River is the second longest river in North America, flowing over 2,000 miles from its source at Lake Itasca to the Gulf of Mexico. Now, who can tell me which states it passes through? Martha Wilson surveyed the sea of young faces before her, some eager, others clearly dreaming of the afternoon freedom that awaited them outside the schoolhouse windows. June sunshine filtered through the glass, creating dancing patterns on the rough wooden floor as cottonwood fluff drifted past like summer snow. 2 months had transformed the cramped, dusty schoolroom into a space that reflected its new teacher's determination to create order from chaos. Hand-drawn maps adorned the walls, books stood in neat rows on salvaged shelves, and wildflowers brightened the windowsills in repurposed preserving jars. A freckled boy in the third row thrust his hand skyward, nearly bouncing from his seat in enthusiasm. "Yes, Timothy?" "Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, Illinois, Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas, Mississippi, and Louisiana, Ms. Wilson," he proclaimed in a single breath. Martha smiled, despite the familiar ache that accompanied any mention of Wilson, a name that now served as both shield and wound. "Excellent. And which is the longest river in North America?" A girl with braids raised her hand tentatively. "The Missouri River, Miss Wilson, though many consider it a tributary of the Mississippi." "Very good, Emma." The clock above the blackboard showed 2:45. "Now, for tomorrow, I'd like you to create your own maps, showing both rivers and the states they touch. Remember to include a compass rose and legend." The collective groan that greeted this assignment failed to mask the underlying affection her students had developed for their unusual teacher. In just 8 weeks, Martha had earned their respect through a combination of firm boundaries, genuine interest in their progress, and occasional unorthodox methods that made learning seem less like drudgery and more like discovery. As the final bell rang, chaos briefly reigned while 27 children gathered slates, books, and lunch pails before streaming toward freedom. Martha stood at the door, exchanging brief words with each student. Encouragement for shy Emma, a gentle reminder about tomorrow's arithmetic test for distracted Samuel, praise for Timothy's improved penmanship. When the last child vanished down the dusty street, Martha's carefully maintained smile faded. She closed the schoolroom door and leaned against it, allowing herself a moment of quiet truth. Teaching gave her purpose, structure, even occasional joy, but it couldn't fill the hollow space that had formed when she left Golden Creek Ranch. Her small living quarters behind the classroom offered modest comforts: a narrow bed, a washstand, a table that served as both desk and dining surface, and a bookshelf containing the few volumes she'd managed to purchase with her meager salary. The space was neat, functional, and utterly impersonal, much like the persona she'd constructed for Cheyenne's newest educator. Martha splashed water on her face from the porcelain basin, studying her reflection in the small mirror above. Her hair had grown long enough to style in a simple twist at her nape, and feminine clothing once again draped her figure. Yet sometimes she still caught herself standing too straight, her stride too long, physical echoes of Matthew lingering in her muscles' memory. A knock at the schoolhouse's main door interrupted her reverie. Martha quickly patted her face dry and smoothed her skirts, practiced composure settling over her features like a familiar mask. "Coming!" She found Mrs. Holloway on the schoolhouse steps, clutching a covered basket. The blacksmith's wife served as head of the school board and had taken Martha under her wing after Hank Dixon's unexpected recommendation. "Thought you might enjoy some fresh cornbread and preserves," Mrs. Holloway announced, pressing the basket into Martha's hands before she could refuse. "You're looking peaky again, Miss Wilson. A young woman needs proper sustenance, especially one managing all these rambunctious children alone." "You're too kind," Martha replied, genuine gratitude warming her voice. The basket likely contained enough food for several meals, a welcome supplement to her limited cooking abilities and budget. Nonsense, just practical. Mrs. Holloway's gaze swept the schoolroom, visible through the open door, her approval evident. "The board's quite pleased with your progress. Attendance is up 30%, and even the Hendricks boy has stopped playing hooky to fish." "The children are eager to learn when properly engaged," Martha said, carefully sidestepping the compliment. Mrs. Holloway studied her with shrewd eyes that missed little. You know, my dear, the position comes with a proper house once you've completed a full term. That back room is hardly adequate for permanent residence. It suits me perfectly well, Martha assured her. I have few needs. Few needs, perhaps, but what about wants? The older woman's expression softened. A young woman shouldn't live like a nun in a cell. There's more to life than work, you know. The gentle probe toward Martha's personal life, or conspicuous lack thereof, had become a regular feature of their interactions. Despite genuine appreciation for the woman's kindness, Martha maintained the polite barrier she'd erected around her heart. Teaching fulfills me completely, she replied with practiced conviction, but I appreciate your concern. Mrs. Holloway sighed, recognizing the familiar deflection. Well, should you find yourself with an evening free, Reverend Parker's nephew is visiting from Denver, a lawyer with excellent prospects and conversation to match. I've invited both of you for supper on Saturday. Martha mustered her most regretful smile. I've promised to prepare Monday's geography lesson that evening, perhaps another time? Of course. Mrs. Holloway's disappointed acceptance suggested she expected no different. Enjoy the cornbread while it's warm. After the woman departed, Martha placed the basket on her desk, the simple kindness threatening to crack her carefully maintained composure. These good people accepted her without question, offered friendship without demand, and yet she kept them at arm's length, terrified of forming attachments that might lead to further pain or discovery of her past. The schoolroom suddenly felt stifling despite its open windows. Martha decided a walk through town might clear her head before she settled in with her grading and lesson preparations for the evening. Main Street bustled with late afternoon activity. The general store's porch hosted its usual gathering of men exchanging news and exaggerated tales while smoking pipes and whittling sticks to toothpick dimensions. Martha nodded polite greetings as she passed, still somewhat uncomfortable with the male attention her position attracted. Female teachers were rare enough in Wyoming territory that her unmarried status generated speculation among Cheyenne's bachelor population. She paused outside Hammond's Mercantile, ostensibly examining fabric displayed in the window, while actually listening to voices drifting from the adjacent alley, a habit developed from weeks of gathering intelligence about Golden Creek through casual eavesdropping. Largest silver deposit they've found in the territory, a deep voice declared. Territorial Assayer's office confirmed it yesterday. On Hargrove land? Another man asked, incredulously. Old Josiah's been ranching that property for 20 years without a hint of mineral wealth. Martha's attention sharpened, her fingers frozen on the calico display. Northern section, up against the ridge. Apparently that foreman of theirs... Convenient timing, with Hargrove at death's door and his daughter desperate to save the ranch, the first voice lowered conspiratorially. That's the interesting part. Thomas didn't inform the Hargroves. Took samples straight to Carlton at the bank, who brought in Continental Mining to verify the find. They're preparing an offer to buy the entire property, a fraction of its actual worth, naturally. Mighty underhanded business, the second man remarked, though disapproval didn't mask the undercurrent of admiration for such clever maneuvering. That's frontier opportunity, my friend. The girl's barely keeping that spread together, and the old man suffered another attack last week. Doctor gave him a month at most. Once he's gone, she'll have no choice but to sell. What about that Eastern fellow she was engaged to, the one who turned out to be... Long gone, ran off after being exposed at Founder's Day, left the poor girl humiliated and the ranch without financial backing. Martha's cheeks burned at this simplified version of events. She forced herself to remain still, straining to hear more. Thomas gets a handsome commission as the finder, Carlton gets a percentage as broker, and Continental Mining gets a silver deposit worth 20 times what they're paying. Everyone wins except the Hargroves. When's the offer being presented? Week's end. Papers already drawn up in Carlton's office. Once Josiah signs, the deal's final. No backing out even if they discover the silver later. The conversation shifted to other business matters, but Martha remained frozen, her mind racing. Frank had found silver. Instead of informing his employers, he'd conspired with the bank manager to steal the property through manipulation. The financial discrepancies she'd uncovered now made perfect sense. Frank had been deliberately weakening the ranch's position, making them vulnerable to exactly this scenario. Without conscious decision, Martha found herself walking toward her schoolroom with quickening steps. The copies she'd made of the ranch ledgers, tucked away in her trunk, might contain the evidence needed to prove the conspiracy, if only she could connect the missing pieces. Lamplight cast Martha's shadow in elongated form across the schoolroom floor as midnight approached. Papers surrounded her in organized chaos. Copied ledger entries, notes on water rights, cattle counts, and property boundaries. Her hair had escaped its pins, falling around her shoulders as she hunched over the makeshift timeline she'd constructed. It was never about simple embezzlement, she murmured to herself, tracing connections between dates. That was just a convenient side benefit. The pattern revealed itself with damning clarity. Frank had been systematically devaluing Golden Creek Ranch for nearly a year. The diverted water that created a drought in the north pastures, the lost cattle that mysteriously disappeared from that same area, the inflated repair costs for fences that were never actually fixed, all concentrated around the section now revealed to contain silver. He'd created a fictional crisis to force a sale while simultaneously ensuring the valuable land appeared worthless. The bank's unusual loan terms suddenly made sense as well. Carlton had inserted clauses specifically designed to create pressure at this precise moment. Martha sat back, rubbing her tired eyes. The evidence was compelling but circumstantial. Without proof of the silver discovery and the secret negotiations, Catherine would have little recourse against such powerful interests. More troubling was the question of what Martha should do with this information. Anonymous letters were easily dismissed. Telegrams could be intercepted by Frank's allies. The most effective approach would be delivering the evidence personally, the option that also carried the highest personal cost. Catherine had made her feelings devastatingly clear at their last encounter. Returning to Golden Creek meant facing not just rejection, but potential humiliation or even arrest. The town had every reason to run her out on the next stage, or worse. Yet the alternative meant abandoning Catherine to predators circling like wolves around injured prey. Despite everything, Martha couldn't bear the thought of Catherine losing her beloved ranch through such calculated treachery. "What would you do, Matthew?" she asked the empty room, imagining her brother's steady presence. The answer came with his imagined voice. The right thing, however difficult. Martha began gathering the scattered papers, organizing them into a coherent presentation. She'd need more than moral certainty to convince Catherine. She needed irrefutable evidence linking Frank to Carlton and the mining company. A plan formed as she worked. Carlton's office would contain the purchase agreement mentioned by the businessmen. If she could somehow obtain a copy, combined with her financial analysis. The schoolroom door burst open, startling Martha so badly she knocked over her inkwell. Hank Dixon stood in the doorway, his usually cheerful expression grave beneath his peculiar hat. "Miss Wilson? Thought I might find you burning midnight oil." "Mr. Dixon," Martha acknowledged, hastily covering her notes with blank paper. "Is something wrong?" "Just came from the telegraph office. Message arrived for Widow Peterson about her nephew at Golden Creek." He removed his hat, turning it in weathered hands. Josiah Hargrove took a severe turn, not expected to last the week. The news struck Martha like a physical blow. Despite everything, she'd grown genuinely fond of the ailing rancher during her time at Golden Creek. More devastating was the knowledge of what his death would mean for Catherine. Alone, vulnerable, and hours away from being manipulated into surrendering her birthright. "Thank you for telling me," she said quietly. Hank studied her with surprising perception. "Never did believe you meant those folks harm," he remarked. "Stage leaves for Golden Creek at dawn tomorrow. Just thought you might want to know." After he departed, Martha stood motionless in the silent schoolroom, the decision crystallizing in her mind like frost on a winter window. Regardless of personal risk, she couldn't allow the conspiracy to succeed. Catherine deserved to know the truth about Frank's betrayal and the silver discovery, even if she never forgave Martha for her deception. Dawn painted the eastern sky in watercolor hues as Martha secured her valise to the stage's roof rack. She wore her best dress, a practical Navy traveling outfit purchased with her first month's teaching wages, and carried a leather satchel containing her carefully organized evidence. Mrs. Holloway had received her hastily scribbled note explaining a family emergency requiring immediate departure. The school board would be displeased, but Martha had arranged for the minister's college-educated daughter to supervise classes during her absence, if she returned at all. That uncertain future stretched before her as she climbed into the waiting stagecoach. The familiar interior, scuffed leather seats and windows clouded with the accumulated dust of countless journeys, triggered memories of her arrival 3 months earlier. She'd been a different person then, desperate, deceptive, seeking only temporary sanctuary. Now she returned by choice, risking everything not for personal gain, but because it was right. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her initial lie had been selfish, while this difficult truth was perhaps the most selfless act of her life. "Last passenger?" Hank called from the driver's seat. "Yes," Martha confirmed, settling her skirts around her. "Next stop, Golden Creek," he announced, snapping the reins. The stage lurched forward, wheels crunching through Cheyenne's still quiet streets. As buildings gave way to open country, Martha watched the landscape unfold with a curious mixture of dread and determination. Whatever awaited at the journey's end, rejection, hostility, or worse, she would face it with the courage she'd once only pretended to possess. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks gilded by morning light. Somewhere beyond them lay Golden Creek Ranch, and Catherine, the woman who had unknowingly taught Martha the difference between impersonating goodness and actually embodying it. Martha opened her satchel, reviewing her organized evidence one final time. The documents told a story of calculated betrayal by those Catherine trusted most. Delivering this painful truth might be Martha's last gift to her, a chance to save the land that had been Catherine's life and legacy. Whether Catherine would accept this gift from the woman who had once deceived her remained to be seen. Martha closed her eyes, the rocking motion of the stage both lulling and preparing her for whatever lay ahead. "I'm coming, Catherine," she whispered to the empty coach, words carried away by the rhythmic pounding of hooves on the western trail. "Whether you want me or not."